All right, team, at long last, first and foremost, I apologize. They banned my video editing software in America, and they didn't ban it like before I started. I opened it up, created the whole thing, and then went to export it, and it was like, yeah, bro, we're out. We got banned. So I had to totally restart, and I had to find a brand new video editor and learn a video editor all this morning, in fact. But I did finally get all that done, and I actually ended up with DaVinci Resolve, by the way, which is a little not user-friendly and requires like a space brain to understand. But once you get the hang of it, it's actually pretty good. But regardless of that, let's get into my final build diary for my beloved Titan. But first and foremost, let's look at my absolutely dank MTX. And believe me, I can hear you right now. Riley, no one gives a fuck about your MTX, although it does look absolutely stellar. Let me teach you yet another lesson, one of many. It's a phrase I learned in the Navy that was taught to me by one of my chiefs, okay? This is a motto I live by. We do good things, we do things good, and most importantly, we look good doing things, and god damn do we look fucking good. Dude, and this MTX allows you to summon a bunch of the GGG developers. Like, this shit's tight. And also, you have to have this on your bars. Like, if you take it off and load new to instance, it just forces it on here. So we have to put seismic grind or left click, otherwise you'll just fucking tar it out in the middle of a map and summon some bullshit. I like to think of them as GGG devs because while you're enduring the PTSD simulator that is Val Vietnam, they're running around doing fuck all, telling everyone they're on holiday break for 2 weeks. Hopefully you enjoyed your 14 days of Christmas, because Val Factory made me want to vape for the first time, and I've never questioned my sexuality. Also, you can summon multiples of this fucking idiot, and I've seen enough Shark Week to know that they're ignoring each other because they know the other ones won't drop any loot. And I know this because this guy is turned away like this worthless fuck pile is going to drop a tier 6 Waystone and 2 Regal Orbs on a monster level 82 map with 80 quant and 120 rarity. God, how did he know? But anyways, my shameless minute 30 intro on my MTX aside, let's talk about the build. The single target on this build is absolutely absurd. This is my best bosser by far, and it comes online at an extremely early budget point, so you don't need a ton of investment to completely annihilate bosses. This is a T15 boss with max Atlas passives and 73% more monster life, and it gets totally shit on. The clear on this build is very solid, although admittedly it's a little bit under where I'd prefer it to be. This is a max Atlas breach with the 15% density and 30% opening speed on a tier 15 map. This is 81% more monster life with 38% monster damage, as well as minus 14 max res, and the build does it phenomenally well. The two main issues with clearing on this build is that it just doesn't have that much screen coverage as much as I would prefer, and it's just generally slow. I don't think he's a very good breach farmer. You can run the 30% slower and it's actually fine, but in general, I don't think I would run this character for breach, although I absolutely do think that you could. I think one of the strengths of this build by far, especially when it's mapping, is its survivability. I pretty much never die on this build. Now granted, I don't run like crazy rippy maps with 80% damage modifiers or something like that. You would definitely die if you do those, but if you're running just normal maps, you know, maybe a couple damage modifiers here and there, or a damage modifier plus minus max res, you'll be totally fine. Especially once you hit that 4K life mark, it is very difficult to die when you're mapping, and you don't really die to bosses because you pretty much instantly delete them, so it's very difficult to die to them as well. I think the survivability of this build is one of my favorite parts about playing it. It's very cozy, kind of. There's a caveat here. This build is not for the faint of heart. You cannot be a pussy when you're playing this shit. Pirate fucking Roachware couldn't run this build in his dreams, okay? When you are taking damage and you have a ton of mobs on screen, if you cower away or you try to run or start spam rolling, you are guaranteed to die. Lifesteal and health on kill are the two regen layers for this build, and they will carry you through like infinite amounts of damage, unless of course you get one shot. I've seen lifesteal hit to like 5,500 health per second, and that comes from dealing damage in the face of taking damage. You cannot back away at all, and I kind of like that because it's very archetypical of a warrior, and I think it works very well. And once you combine this with cannibalism to get that 4% of health back per kill, it reinforces the idea that in order to stay alive, your best option is pretty much universally to throw the fuck down. There are some cases where maybe a couple dodge rolls here and there is acceptable, but for the most part, staying in the fray and getting damage out is the #1 thing that will keep you alive. I like this playstyle a lot because it really tests your testicular fortitude a lot of the times, and there are some moments where you're like, bro, get me the fuck out of here. But more often than not, when that is the case, your best option is to hold W and slam ass. To get into the character itself, I believe we're around like 30 divine, I think is where I'm at in terms of its total investment. This ring was like 10 div, and I just yoinked it from my witch hunter. This chest piece is, oh, hello, don't mind if I do. We're about to be 35 div in here soon. But this chest piece, once you get this is so much life, especially when you combine it with the Titan passive that is Mysterious Lineage. This chest piece is absolutely cracked. I did go with the the 10 all Ellie and max life one, because I think that that is probably the best option. Just getting rid of all that extra suffix pressure from the rest of your gear, especially to get stats and stuff, is really nice. I paid about 4 div for this bad boy. The weapon itself was 10 div. This is actually a really good weapon. You notice I went for a lot of attack speed. Attack speed is just way too important, and I'll cover that a bit more. I still have the thrill steel. Getting the actual Earthshatter out is just so important, and having low attack time is crucial for staying alive. You will of course need a mana leech roll somewhere on your gear, as well obviously a life leech roll. The only other slot that's a bit special is going to be the gloves. The reason for this being is we get increased attack speed as well as +2 to melee skills. I would never exchange these mods out for anything else, as they are so crucial to the build's functionality, from just how it feels to the amount of damage it gives you. You have to remember, plus skills on Earthshatter is really important, because if you look at the actual slam damage, it's 263 of attack damage, 263%, but the explosion itself is 680%, and this goes up, I think it's like 14 to 20%, something like that, with every level. So plus to levels is really important for damage on this build. The last thing I'll mention too is this is why I went for that 50 all res on my chest piece, because it just opens up a lot of the suffixes elsewhere on gear, and the main purpose for that was for gloves, because we want to make sure we always have these 2 mods, and getting these 2 mods plus another res roll is immediately like 10 div, especially if there's any sort of life on it. I think these were like 2 or 3, I want to say. The rest of my gear is like 2 div or whatever. This is some budget bullshit. Probably not going to replace it, because I'm not going to be gearing this character any further, and I'll talk about that a bit later. Looking at the defenses of this build, you know, we have 4200 life, 66% armor, +1 to fire and cold, and then only +2 to lightning. We used to have this whole tree specced out, but I don't think this is worth it anymore. And honestly too, from the defensive standpoint, leech as a defensive layer is absolutely fucking ridiculous. I probably don't need this point here, but I was just kind of experimenting a little bit. Leech is honestly so good, and I am such a hardcore believer in it. I don't know how it particularly works, if there's like a cap on it like there was in PoE 1, so maybe stacking it isn't very good, but I think if you got a breach ring with a fat leech roll, and you obviously life catalyst it a bunch, and then you picked up, of course, Berserk over here, because this gives us 0.2% of physical attack damage, leech his life per rage, and then this build we absolutely do stack rage. Rage is extremely good. I think if you actually added all that up, you would hit absolutely insane leech values from your actual damage output, and you can see that right here when you're in a map, when you're actually fighting stuff, it'll show you life recovery per second from leech or whatever. I think if you can actually stack it, and it does work the way I think it does, then absolutely stacking leech would be 100% the way to go. You would get a ton of HPS in maps. The other thing that's really nice is that if you ever run a no life recovery or less life recovery map modifier, you can just swap out fast metabolism with Valpack, and it pretty much is no different, although Valpack is rough. I definitely don't want to run this forever. If we had a lot more attack speed and a bunch more hits, this would probably be pretty good, but because we're so slow, we only want to take this to fix that map modifier. Diving a bit more into the tree, some of the changes I've made from the last build diary, the first namely being is speccing into stun buildup. Stun buildup is absolutely fucking absurd as an offensive and defensive layer. It is easily one of the most potent things in the game by far, and that's why I ended up also changing my Ascendency as well. This is really nice, because this actually, especially on like big healthy bosses, this just jumps you to the stun phase where you want to be, because you want to just be spamming Seismic and Infernal Cry against a stun enemy. And then, of course, Surprising Strength is absolutely insane. Once we combine all this stun bullshit with Perfect Opportunity to get damage with hits is lucky against heavy stun enemies, and then you throw Heft on as a damage support, the amount of output you have is absolutely wild, and it was infinitely better than anything I was doing before. I honestly don't even know what the fuck I was doing before, but this is for sure the way to go. I think this is probably the best way to have your Ascendency set up as well. I did like hulking form, especially for the CDR it gave on your Warcries, but the problem is that because this build isn't spec'd for it, I don't really get a lot of value out of it. Hulking form is actually very good. It's probably the best node on this entire Ascendency just overall, but if you're not actually building for it, it's not very useful. Colossal Capacity actually pisses me off to no end. Like, really? 2 Ascendency points for a fucking purse? Especially in a game where when you die, you lose all the loot on the ground? Motherfucker, I don't need a purse to carry more shit. I need a build that functions so I can even pick up shit to fill the original inventory in the fucking first place. That being said, Aftershocks are actually pretty sick. Before I talk about Aftershocks though, there is a small downside to running a bunch of stun buildup, which is that your Seismic Cry goes on cooldown all the time while you're mapping, and this can be really annoying, and in fact, it can be deadly in some cases, because the way that you pop your spikes obviously is through your Warcry. If both your Warcries are on cooldown, then you kind of just sit there with your dick in your hand, and you can actually take a lot of damage. Fortunately, with fast metabolism from the tree, we have the lifesteal to kind of offset offset this lull in damage output. But setting Seismic Cry on cooldown a lot has actually been really fucking annoying. I'm not gonna lie. Seismic Cry only empowers the slam, and it only goes on cooldown if it hits a heavy stun enemy. And now, since I have all this stun buildup that I'm spec'd into and all this different stuff, like, you pretty much are constantly putting it on cooldown, and you're actually forced to rotate between the two cries a lot, which is kind of a pain in the ass. Normally, you would have just used Infernal Cry off cooldown and Seismic Cry when you needed it to get a spike pop, but now because we're alternating consistently, there are definitely periods, and it's pretty often, where you just don't have the ability to pop spikes because you don't have a Warcry available. That being said, it's really not that big of a deal, and it's fairly negligible, but it is fucking annoying in comparison to how it used to be. Going back to Aftershocks, I do think these are incredibly good, and it is most certainly worthwhile to spec into them here and there. And then I also, while I'm mapping, I take the Aftershock support gem. I don't know, again, if they Aftershock the initial hit from the slam or if they Aftershock the actual explosion from the spikes. It's probably going to be this one, but either way, the reason why Aftershocks are really good is because they provide you something to fill the gaps in between your hit timings, right? Because you slam the ground, the spike goes out, and then you explode it. All of the lull between those periods and between those instances of dealing damage is usually going to be covered by Aftershock. And I found that especially while you're running Breach and you're running against like really high density maps, Aftershock will save your ass a lot of the time and just keep shit from getting on top of you. So overall, I do think Aftershocks are very good. And again, from the damage perspective, I don't know if they're as good as I think they might be, but I still think they are pretty solid. Some of the problems to note with the passive tree is that, especially when it comes to defenses, this shit feels like it's more filler than fucking One Piece. This passive tree unironically reminds me of when me and my buddy were really drunk and we made a bet, and whoever lost had to watch a random episode of One Piece, and we ended up watching like episode 683, and it was just about like a bunch of fucking shark people at the bottom of the ocean, and there were no named characters. It was like a totally different show. That's kind of what this reminds me of in terms of how useless some of this shit is. I mean, who gives a fuck about made to last? This shit sucks balls. This is like 200 base armor or some dumb shit. Who gives a fuck about this? It's like 1%. You get more armor from the 2 travel nodes than you get from this, so I don't know why it's even a fucking notable. But overall, a lot of the defensive nodes just feel like filler fucking garbage, and they're totally meaningless, with a few exceptions, I suppose. The big issue is that we don't need fucking armor. Okay, I don't need 200% of armor against critical hits. I need defenses against fucking wizards and spells, okay? It's about spell damage, boys. No one gives a shit about fizz damage. 66% is plenty, okay? We're talking about the bazillion spells that fly at you at any given moment in every map. And then maybe you're getting one shot by Zesh, and the stupid ass crow bitch is lame as fuck. But for the most part, it's spell damage that you need defenses against, and you have this. We get Prism Guard, that's it. And one fucking life node and some strength over here, that's it. It just feels like shit. This whole tree is shit. I don't like it. The last thing I will mention tree-wise is with increased area of effect of attacks, this is just fucking ass anyway. Like, it doesn't really even do much, and it doesn't do nearly enough to solve the clear issues from the low explosion radius. Like, I think even if I take off magnified effect, like, magnified effect is 40%, and it's half of a fucking meter. Are you serious? Like, this probably isn't even worth it, but don't worry, I'm gonna solve this too. I literally have an entire solution to all of the problems I'm bitching about, but I can't unveil it until the very end, and some of you might already even know. But before I tell you, I want to go over the gem links really fast. Our two main swaps for single target are concentrated effect and heavy swing. Even though that heavy swing reduces our attack speed, when you're actually fighting a boss, it doesn't matter because you're still going to be gated by your Warcry cooldown anyway. And then once you swap these two out, you get way more damage. You go from 4,500 to 7,100. I only have Leap Slam here. I don't actually use it. I just use it to hold my gem swaps. That is literally all this is for. Infernal Cry, of course, we have Raging Cry and Enraged Warcry. This just gives us a ton of free damage for absolutely no cost. Raging Cry gives us max rage at all times on top of our rage on hit from our jewels. Pre-med is very good. Herald of Ash just carries cannibalism and vitality. You don't actually have to run Herald of Ash, by the way, and I will probably end up dropping it in my next build. Hint, hint. Berserk is absolutely one of the best buffs you can get. That I think Berserk is crazy. And then Seismic Cry, we have Inspiration and Life Tap. The reason for this being is that one, like when you're actually low on mana, you can just sit there and mash Seismic Cry to get it back. But the other thing too is that on one of your notables, you have 8% increased damage for each time you've Warcried recently. This means that if we just sit there and we mash Seismic Cry, it just gives us a bunch of free damage. And the thing ends up being like, if I don't have these two gems on, it goes from like 4,500 to 7,200. So it's a decent bit of damage to at least open up with. The rest of the gem sub is the same as the other video with Martial Temple and Upheaval and Fire Infusion. I'll probably end up dropping Fire Infusion for heft, especially when you take Perfect Opportunity to get that lucky hit damage against heavy stunned enemies. And yeah, that's pretty much gems. I will do a Mobalytics guide and leave it in the description. So if you want to look over any of this or look over some of the specifics of gear, you guys will have that available. Overall, I think the build is absolutely solid as fuck, especially as far as a warrior goes. It can do all content. I've done Zest 5. You can absolutely do pinnacle bossing on it. It most certainly has the damage for that, especially considering how budget it is. I mean, this is 30 Divine, but you can absolutely get this online for way cheaper than that. And it just does so well on single target while maintaining solid enough clear, and again, just being relatively generally tanky while in maps. Of course, it does have its limitations at the high end of map difficulties. You know, if you're running max map modifier effect with a bunch of damage as element mods to it, you absolutely cannot do it. This build will not do it. It is most certainly not some hand of wisdom in action stat stacking fucking gemling dickhead. However, it is still really solid for the vast majority of content. Most players will probably get plenty out of this build. And it doesn't use any of that OP shit like Herald chain reactions or stat stacking or any of that fucking garbage, all of which will most likely be nerfed. And realistically, by 2030, GGG will remember that Warrior is a fucking class in the game and they'll probably buff it, so that'll be cool. With all that being said, I still wouldn't recommend this version of the build. And I know what you're thinking. You fucking monkey dickhead, you couldn't have said that 16 minutes ago before I watched all this bullshit. Okay, hold on. The reason why I say I wouldn't recommend this version is because the Titan, comparatively to its Warbringer counterpart on the exact same build, is total dog shit. I've been doing a bunch of theory crafting, and I'm 99% positive the Warbringer version of this build is better in every single way. You can, of course, run this build on Titan, and it will absolutely slap the fuck out, but the problem I have with Titan is that it doesn't have a lot of interactivity with this build in particular. Whereas if we compare it to something like Warbringer, Great Wolf's Howl alone, this Ascendency point is literally better than this entire fucking tree. Warbringer just solves so many problems that this build runs into, particularly with cooldown resources and that sort of thing. I won't get too much into the specifics, but Warbringer in its totality just provides us with so much versatility when it comes to building and infinitely more options than the Titan by far. A comment on the previous build diary asked me if I could go back, would I run it as Warbringer? I wasn't sure at the time and I gave him some like half-assed wishy-washy answer, but I can tell you right now, 3000%, if I could go back and do it again, I would pick a fucking Warbringer. And in fact, that is exactly what I'm going to do, because I do love this build so much. I thoroughly enjoy playing it. This is my most favorite build by far. Fuck the Witch Hunter, and fuck that cheap bitch, that sorceress skank. No one cares about mana stacking. That shit's lame as fuck. You guys all yelled at me, okay, for being a fucking cheeser. I'm about to show you the lord of fucking melee, okay? I'm telling you, this Warbringer build is gonna be fucking cracked. And with that, I cannot wait to see you guys in the next one, where I shall show off my massive buff to penis length and girth on my Earthshatter Warbringer, baby. And I'll also do a build guide, because that build is going to be my magnum opus. But until then, deuces, boys.